I used to think nothing could shake me. 15 years on the force, I'd seen it all. Domestic disputes turned bloody, suicides that made my stomach turn, crime scenes that didn't make sense. No matter how many times I looked at them, I thought I'd built up an immunity to fear. Then came the night I worked third shift alone at the old station, and now I know better. It was a slow night, the kind that drags on forever. I was covering for Martinez, who called in sick last minute, which meant I was the only officer in our tiny substation on the edge of town. The place was old, used to be a courthouse back in the 1920s before it was repurposed. Even with the lights on, it always felt dark, like the shadows stretched a little too far. Dispatch was handled by the main station downtown, so it was just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional radio chatter. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the landline rang. No one calls the station landline, not at that hour. I picked up. Sheriff's Department. Silence. Then, officer, the voice was small, childlike, a girl. I straightened. Yes, this is Officer Powell. Are you okay? A pause. Then, barely above a whisper. He won't let me leave. Something cold crawled down my spine. Who won't let you leave? No answer, just soft, shuddering breaths. Where are you? I asked, grabbing a pen, ready to take down an address. But when I glanced at the phone's caller ID, the display was blank. No number, no incoming call. Static crackled through the receiver. He's watching. Then, the line went dead. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was just tired. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the call log. No record of an incoming call at 2:17 a.m. Then, from down the hall, a sound. A faint thump. Coming from holding. We only had 2 cells, and they were both supposed to be empty. I hadn't booked anyone that night. Heart pounding. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the hallway. The air felt heavier back there, like the walls were pressing in. I reached the holding area and flicked on the lights. Both cells were open, empty, no sign of movement. I was about to turn back when I noticed something that stopped me cold. One of the cots inside the second cell. The sheets were wrinkled, the pillow slightly indented, like someone had been lying there, like someone had just been there. I locked both cells twice and returned to the front desk. Told myself I was imagining things, that the landline call was a glitch. Then I noticed the stack of old case files beside the computer. I'd been working on clearing out old records earlier in the night, just sorting through forgotten reports from years past. But one of the folders was open, and sitting on top, a photograph. It was an old Polaroid, the kind we used before everything went digital, faded and yellowed at the edges. It showed a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, sitting on the cot in holding cell number 2. She had long, tangled hair and was wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Her expression was blank, but her eyes were looking past the camera, at something behind the person taking the picture. The hair on my arms stood up. I flipped the photo over. There was a date scrawled in black ink, February 4, 1987. I turned back to the booking records, pulled up the log from that date, and there it was. Jane Doe, age approx. 10, found wandering Route 6, unresponsive, placed in holding overnight. But there was nothing after that. No follow-up, no release form, no record of where she went. Just a single note scribbled at the bottom of the page. Removed from holding, 2:17. My stomach twisted. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:17. And then the station lights flickered. I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped over. The air in the station had changed thick, suffocating. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, barefoot, coming from the hallway near holding. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs, and she was standing there. The girl from the photograph. She stood in the dim hallway, her white hospital gown hanging off her small frame, her tangled hair covering part of her face. But her eyes, Jesus Christ, her eyes were locked on me, and then she smiled. Not a child smiled, something older, something wrong. She took a step toward me. I moved before I could think, yanking open the bottom drawer of my desk and grabbing the station keys. I bolted for the front door, shoving the key into the lock with shaking hands. And that's when I felt it. Cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. A whisper, soft and hollow. You never let me leave. I turned. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the air wasn't. I could feel her, still there, still watching. I don't remember much after that. I think I ran, got in my cruiser, tore out of there at 90 miles an hour. I filed a transfer request the next morning, moved stations, but I never stopped looking into it. There was no record of what happened to Jane Doe, no missing persons matching her description, but I did find one thing: a newspaper clipping, February 5, 1987. It talked about an officer's sudden disappearance during his shift. Officer Daniel Mercer, the last person on duty that night, the last officer to see Jane Doe. His body was never found, only his badge. Left inside holding cell number 2, right where the pillow was indented. I don't work nights anymore, and I never answer calls that come in at 2:17. The call came in at 2:37 a.m. Dispatch to Unit 19. We've got a welfare check at 612 Oak Ridge Drive. Caller reports screams from the abandoned house next door. No known occupants. Requesting immediate response. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temple. It was always the late night calls that got under my skin, the ones where you knew you'd be walking into something strange. I had been on the force for 12 years, seen more than my share of awful things, but the quiet ones always stuck with me. The calls where there was nothing but silence on the other end, or houses where the air felt wrong, where your gut told you to turn around and leave before you even stepped inside. Still, protocol was protocol. Unit 19, copy that, en route. I pulled onto Oak Ridge Drive, the engine hummed the only sound on the empty street. The house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, just like I remembered from a case years back. It had been abandoned since a murder-suicide in '9. A man had killed his wife and son, then turned a shotgun on himself. Typical case of a quiet guy losing it. The house never sold. Too much bad history. I parked out front and killed the engine. The house sat in darkness, its windows like dead eyes staring out at me. A broken porch swing moved slightly in the wind. The front door looked intact, no sign of a break-in, but as I stepped out of the cruiser, I heard it, a voice, a single faint whisper coming from inside the house. I turned my radio down and listened harder. Help me. A woman's voice, just barely audible. My blood ran cold. I approached the door carefully, my hand resting on my service weapon. This is Officer Daniels with the police department. If someone's in there, call out now. Silence. I knocked. The door creaked open a fraction, just enough to reveal the darkened hallway beyond. A single dusty footprint marked the wooden floor. Someone had been inside recently. I stepped in. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something else, something metallic. Blood? No, just old, musty rot. My flashlight cut through the dark, sweeping over peeling wallpaper and a staircase leading up into more shadows. A quiet thump came from upstairs. I tightened my grip on my gun. If there's someone up there, make yourself known. Nothing. I let out a slow breath and started up the stairs. They creaked under my weight, each step like a gunshot in the silence. At the top, a long hallway stretched before me. The doors to the rooms stood slightly ajar, revealing slivers of darkness inside, and then I saw it. The first door on the right had something written on it, scratched deep into the wood. I see you. A chill ran through me. The writing looked fresh. Another thump, this time behind me. I spun around, my light darting through the darkness. The hallway was empty. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. Help me! Help me! It came from the end of the hall, the last door. I moved forward, forcing myself to breathe slow and steady. The door was slightly open, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. I reached for the knob. The second I touched it, the door slammed shut on its own. I jumped back, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, from the other side, a sound. A single, ragged breath. Someone was standing on the other side of that door. I raised my gun, step out slowly, hands where I can see them. Nothing. I hesitated. Then, with one swift movement, I kicked the door open. The room was empty. No furniture, no footprints in the thick layer of dust. But the air was wrong, heavy, charged, like something was still there, watching me. Then my radio crackled. Unit 19, what's your status? I exhaled, grounding myself. House is empty. Probably just some squatter screwing around. I'll do one more sweep and clear the scene. A pause. Then, Unit 19, who's with you? My stomach dropped. What? We just heard something. On your mic. A voice. A woman's voice. A lump formed in my throat. My hands went ice cold. Dispatch, I said slowly. Play it back. A moment of static. Then, a whisper. He's here. Behind you. A floorboard creaked. Right. Behind. Me. I spun, but before I could react, the door slammed shut. The lights went out, and something breathed against my ear. Then, a whisper, so close it made my skin crawl. You shouldn't have come back. And the world went black. I had been on the force for 8 years. Most of my nights as a patrol officer were filled with the usual drunk drivers, bar fights, the occasional robbery in progress. You'd think it'd be easy to get used to the job's unpredictability, but nothing prepared me for that night. It started like any other shift. I was patrolling the south side of town where things tended to get a little rougher after dark. My partner, Martinez, was riding with me. We weren't expecting much, just the usual noise complaints and the odd call about kids messing around where they shouldn't be. Then, the call came in. A woman's voice, trembling, breathless. Please, he's going to kill me. Martinez and I snapped to attention. The dispatcher tried to get her location, but before she could finish her sentence, the line went dead. Did we get an address? I asked, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Negative, the dispatcher responded. Call disconnected before she could say, trying to trace the call now. Martinez swore under his breath, grabbing the tablet from the dashboard. They got a rough location based on the ping. It's a couple of blocks from here. I hit the lights and siren, speeding through the quiet streets, scanning the houses as we approached the vicinity. When we turned onto Sycamore Street, we heard it, screaming, high-pitched, desperate, coming from a house at the end of the block. We didn't hesitate. Guns drawn, we moved up the front steps. The door was unlocked. It swung open with the slightest push, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Police, I shouted. Call out if you can hear us. The house swallowed my voice. I moved forward, my flashlight cutting through the thick, dusty air. The place was in ruins, peeling wallpaper, shattered glass on the floor, furniture covered in sheets. It smelled of decay and abandonment, but that didn't make sense. We had just heard screaming. Martinez cleared the left side while I took the right. Every room was the same. Empty, cold, untouched for years. This place is a damn ghost house, Martinez muttered. You sure we got the right location? I was about to answer when I heard it again. The scream. But this time, it was coming from upstairs. I locked eyes with Martinez. No words were needed. We both bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The second floor was worse, holes in the ceiling, faded pictures still hanging on the walls, their glass cracked or missing. Then, I saw something that stopped me in my track. A door at the end of the hallway. It was closed. But as my flashlight passed over it, I saw the knob twisting, like someone on the other side was about to open it. Martinez whispered, "You see that?" I nodded, heart pounding. I raised my gun, Martinez mirroring me. "Police, step out with your hands up." The knob stopped moving. Then, the door creaked open, slowly, revealing nothing but an empty room. We stepped inside, clearing the corners, checking every possible hiding spot, but there was no one. Just dust and broken furniture. "No way," Martinez muttered. "No damn way." A sudden crash downstairs made us spin around. The front door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Shit! I ran back down the stairs, nearly slipping on the dust-covered floor. I reached the door, yanking it open, expecting to see someone running away, but there was no one outside. Just the quiet street, the empty night. Martinez came up behind me, breathing hard. "We need to get the hell out of here." I nodded, but something wasn't right. My gut was screaming at me. I pulled out my radio. "Dispatch, we're at 421 Sycamore Street. We heard screaming, but the house is abandoned. Can you confirm any past incidents here?" There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, hesitant. "Officer, are you sure you're at that address?" "Affirmative." "Why?" Another pause. Then, "That house has been empty for 20 years. The last recorded incident was a domestic dispute in 2004. Martinez and I exchanged looks. "What happened?" I asked, gripping the radio tighter. A longer pause. Then the dispatcher's voice dropped, as if speaking the words was unsettling her. A woman called 911, screaming for help, said her husband was going to kill her. Officers responded but found nothing. The place was abandoned. No signs of a struggle. My blood ran cold. What happened to her? They never found her. A chill crept up my spine. I turned to Martinez, his face mirroring my own unease. Then we heard it again. The scream. This time, it came from right behind us. We spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty doorway leading into the darkness of the house. Without another word, we backed out, never turning our backs on that house. As soon as we hit the street, Martinez radioed in for backup. We waited in silence, watching, listening, but the house remained still. The screaming never came again. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, but a full sweep of the property turned up nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I had heard, what I had felt. Martinez and I never spoke of that night again, but I stopped driving down Sycamore Street after that. I didn't want to hear the screams. I didn't want to find out what would happen if I stayed long enough to listen. I still dream about the Miller house. I've been a cop for 17 years. In that time, I've seen things that stick with you, things you can't unsee. The kind of cases that wake you up at 3 a.m., sweating, heart racing. But nothing has ever gotten under my skin the way that place did, because I should be dead. And sometimes, late at night, I think maybe I am. It started like any other night shift. The usual radio chatter, a couple of noise complaints, a Dewey. The town was quiet, the way it always is after midnight. Then dispatch crackled in. Unit 103, possible break-in at 608 Miller Road. Vacant property. Neighbor reports seen movement inside. I almost ignored it. See, everyone in town knew about the Miller house. It had been abandoned for over 30 years. A two-story colonial, rotting from the inside out. The last owners, some couple from out of state, disappeared back in '89. No bodies, no sign of struggle, just gone. The house sat empty ever since. No one bought it. No one fixed it up. The place had a reputation. Teenagers dared each other to go inside. A few claimed they spent the night, swore they saw shadows moving where no one stood. Kids talk, you know how it is. I never put much stock in ghost stories. But something about that call didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way dispatch said it. A little too hesitant, like even speaking the address out loud made them uneasy. "Copy that," I said, grabbing my flashlight. I wish I hadn't. The driveway was overgrown, weeds crawling up through cracks in the pavement. My cruiser's headlights cut through the dark, washing over the peeling white paint and broken shutters. From the outside, the place looked empty, but the front door, it was open. Not kicked in, not forced, just slightly ajar, like someone had walked right in and never came back out. A cold breeze drifted from inside. It carried the smell of damp wood and something else, something faintly sour. I pressed my radio. 103 on scene. Front doors open. Going inside to clear. Static. No reply. I tried again. "Dispatch, you copy?" Nothing. Just dead air. That should have been my first sign to turn around. But I didn't. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Dust coated every surface. My flashlight beam caught old furniture covered in white sheets, like the place had been frozen in time. No signs of forced entry. No signs of life. Just an empty house. I moved through the front room, my footsteps the only sound, until they weren't. Somewhere above me, a floorboard creaked. I froze. Another step. Slow, deliberate. Someone was upstairs. I drew my gun. "Police," my voice came out steady, practiced. "If anyone's in here, show yourself." Silence. Then, more footsteps. But this time, they weren't upstairs. They were behind me. I spun, my flashlight cutting through the dark. No one was there. The front door was still open, just a few feet away. I could leave. I should leave. Then, from upstairs, a whisper. Too soft to make out the words. But I swear to God it knew my name. I don't know why I went up there. Every instinct told me to turn around and walk out. But I climbed the steps anyway, my breath tight in my chest. The second floor was worse. The air was thick, wrong. It smelled like old rot, like something long dead had been left behind. The hallways stretched in both directions. 5 doors, all closed except one. The last room on the left. The door stood wide open. like it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside and saw the chair. It sat in the center of the room, a single wooden chair facing the doorway, facing me. That wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the handcuffs attached to the armrest. Old, rusted, but unmistakable. I swallowed hard. My flashlight flickered just for a second. And in that second, I saw someone sitting there. A man, thin, hollow eyes sunken deep into his skull. His mouth moved. I didn't hear words. I heard screaming, not from him, from behind me. A child. A girl. I spun, and the door slammed shut. I grabbed the knob, locked. I kicked the door. Wood splintered, but it held firm. Then, the whispering started again. All around me, dozens of voices, hissing, laughing, some crying, some begging. I pressed against the wall, heart pounding. And then, the chair scraped against the floor. I turned just in time to see the man stand up, his head tilted, his mouth stretching too wide, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. He took a step toward me, then another, his arms lifted. The handcuffs were still on his wrists, still clamped to the chair, and yet he kept walking. I did the only thing I could. I fired. The gunshot rang out like thunder. The man didn't flinch. He just smiled and kept coming. I don't remember how I got out. 1 second, I was trapped in that room, the walls closing in, those things whispering in my ear. The next, I was outside, standing in the middle of the road, my cruiser parked just a few feet away. The front door of the house was closed, like I'd never gone inside, but my gun was warm in my hands, and there was a bullet hole in the upstairs window. I didn't file a report, didn't tell anyone what happened, because when I checked the logs the next day, there was no record of a call to 608 Miller Road, no break-in report, no radio log, nothing. It was like the whole night never happened. But I know the truth. Something was in that house, something that should have stayed forgotten. And sometimes, late at night, when the radio is quiet and the town is sleeping, I swear I hear whispering, calling my name, begging me to come back.